Renault Kiger is a great value proposition in the sub-4 meter SUV segment. Now the new Toyota Taisor also seems to work to a similar brief, but which one does it more convincingly? Let's find out. Look at the two together and the Renault Kiger stands out with its SUV-like presence. Now both do a good impression of the big grille and split headlamp look, but the tall stance and high bonnet line of the Kiger give it far more road presence. The more bulged bodywork also helps in this regard. The rear too is quite smart with its compact sloping shape and the attractive lighting. The Toyota Taisor may be quite similar to the fronts, but the new grille and lighting does help it stand out. Its softer theme has a more committed edge to it given that it is wider and lower than the Renault. But the bodywork is simpler, and while it looks most like a hatchback from the rear, the full width lighting does draw a good amount of attention. That said, you will be wanting for that full SUV experience out on the road. Now at 308 litres, the Taisor's boot space is pretty much par for the course in the segment, and like we've seen before, to carve out this space you need a high lip and a low floor. Now it isn't as high as in the Kiger, but it's still quite a task to picking up heavy items and putting them in. But once inside you realize the space itself is quite practical. It's fully flat. The sides are quite flat, the wheel arches don't intrude too much into the cabin itself, and you also get a 60-40 split function, so weekend luggage for a family of 4 is pretty doable in the Taisor. Now the Kiger's opening isn't as wide as the Taisor, and even the lip is slightly higher, so putting stuff in is going to be even tougher than in the Taisor. But you do realize that at 405 litres, the Kiger has one of the largest boots in the segment, and that really seems to be, at least in this case, down to the length of it. So while we have these bags here right now, even a larger suitcase will fit in face down quite easily here, which in the real world means even more space for your family. And just like the Taisor, the sides are flat, so even bigger items will fit pretty well inside the Kiger. Unlike the more premium offerings in the sub-4 meter SUV space, you will find that the cabins of both these cars feel built to a cost. This is mainly apparent in the slightly hollow plastics that you'll find all around, but here too both have their pros and cons. The Taisor's plastic feel of a slightly lower grade but are more consistently put together, whereas in the Renault you notice the materials themselves seem to be of a higher grade. Taking this further, the switches and controls. The Taisor has some great feeling climate control functions and large buttons, but it loses out on its steering controls and window switches. With the Renault, it's just the opposite. The Taisor is a more practical cabin as well. You have larger door bins front and back than the Kiger, as well as more place to securely hold cups and phones in the central tunnel. The Kiger does have a deep central cubby, but this comes at the cost of cup holders. Both only offer one Type A charge port at the front, but you do get wireless charging. Now the interiors of these two cars here, the Kiger and the Taisor, seem to match what they're doing on the outside. So the Kiger goes really hard with that SUV-ish, ruggedish kind of look, where you see that it has quite a high sill to the dash. The materials, they're quite simply done, and even the design itself, it's not especially flashy or colorful. Whereas the Taisor, it gives you all those varying colors and finishes and angular elements on the dash, which makes it, if you will, a bit more contemporary. The Toyota Taisor makes do with analog dials, but once you get the hang of it, the head-up display is a useful complement to it that functions nearly like a digital driver's display. It offers clear, concise information that's present right in front of you. The Kiger's part digital instrumentation is also functional and offers various layout options that are useful, but the graphics could have been smoother. Both these SUVs also do well with their touchscreens. The Kiger's 7-inch is slightly smaller than the Taisor's 9-inch unit, but its simplicity makes it easier to get used to. That said, the Maruti Suzuki derived unit offers a good deal of information in the Toyota. It's a touch more responsive and is more logically laid out. A great attribute of both is how easy it is to get up and running with the wireless Android Auto and Apple CarPlay function on the move. Now to start with, it's much easier to get into the Taisor than it is in the Kiger. This opening itself is slightly larger, and just the way the seat is sort of integrated into the whole rear structure of the car, it's somewhat simpler. Now, if space is your number one priority, then this is pretty much one of the best you can find in the segment, to be honest. As you can see, I have a good deal of knee room. Even my legs get in right under the seat, which is a bit difficult in the Kiger. The sort of rails for the seat get in the way. So yeah, if you are especially tall, it sort of does hamper your foot comfort, and even in terms of absolute legroom, that's slightly lacking compared to this one. Now, where it doesn't lack is in headroom, again because of its more practical shape. You do get more headroom than this, and with this sloping roof line, it doesn't help matters for the Taisor. But having said that, this actually feels like the area cabin because of the all black color theme in that and the high window sill. You do feel somewhat cocooned together a bit more in that. Now coming to the seat comfort, this is again, given the width of the whole car, it is a wider seat, so the person sitting in the middle will be more comfortable, and both give you sort of flat benches, so that's not that much of an issue. But in the Kiger, it's a completely flat floor or nearly flat, whereas you have this hump here which sort of gets in the way of foot movement. Now another thing that the Taisor misses, which ideally it should have had, is a center armrest, which the Kiger gives you, but the Kiger doesn't give you a center headrest, which is a bit of a miss. Now in terms of amenities, you have rear AC vents in both. The Kiger for some reason doesn't give you anything more than a 12-volt charge port, but here you get two USB Type A and Type C ports, which really are a good addition. As is the norm in this segment, both the cars here come reasonably well equipped, both in terms of features and safety, although the lack of ventilated seats is a miss in both. Now driving both these cars is really quite simple in traffic given the compact footprints. Now the Kiger makes it easier in one way with the high seating position and the fact that you have this really nice view out straight ahead. So placing the car in that regard is easy, where the Taisor scores is with this visibility all around. Now the sill is lower, you don't have that big A pillar blocking your view like how it is in the Kiger. So in either case, driving in traffic is not really much of a concern. This Taisor is of course derived from a Maruti, so you know they get their seating positions right most of the time, and it's no different with that. Now the Kiger, yes, the pedals could sometimes be a bit of a trouble if you are too tall. Both the Taisor and Kiger are powered by 1 litre 3-cylinder turbo petrol engines. They also make around roughly the same outputs at 100 PS and 150 Nm. Now this might be less than what you get in something like a Mahindra XUV 3XO or a Sonnet, but these cars also weigh less, which makes them just as peppy. The Taisor's 10.8 second 0 to 100 kmph time with the automatic is about as fast as anything in this segment, and while the Kiger's CVT can't quite keep up, its 12.8 second time doesn't make it slow by any stretch. Now this Taisor has that booster jet Maruti engine, and it really is one of the more impressive small turbo petrols, especially in this BS6 form, and it's become so much more refined now, especially in comparison to the Kiger, which you feel the vibrations, you feel it to be a bit grumbly, and it has that typical 3-cylinder thrum. None of that is audible here. It's a very smooth, very linear engine with good performance right from above idle. Now with the Kiger, it takes some waking up, so to speak. So in stop-go traffic, it does make for slightly more laboured progress. But then once you're up and going in both of them, you have a good deal of performance. In fact, if you aren't used to these cars, you might be a bit surprised by how sprightly they feel as they keep building revs. Now the Aisin 6-speed torque converter in the Taisor is up to the task of making smooth progress. Yes, it can take a moment more than ideal to swap gears in slow and medium speed driving, but overall it's a fluid, cohesive experience that pairs well with the engine. A positive is the full manual control you can get that lets you rev to the red line and hold, so more spirited driving is possible too. The CVT in the Kiger is one of the better examples of its type, so while you do have that seamless experience that these gearboxes provide, there are still those slow responses that make for some frustration, especially when the engine isn't on the burn. That said, you get drive modes in the Kiger, which does do a good job of adding urgency when you want it. Now we couldn't put these cars through a full real-world mileage test, but going with the ARAI figures, the Taisor has an edge over the Kiger with nearly 20 kmpl against the 18.34 kmpl of the Kiger. Now the way these cars ride and handle, it also goes with that easy-to-use feel that both of them have in the city or generally as well. So with the Kiger, what you will really like is the steering. I mean, it has some heft to it, but it's not cumbersome in that sense at all. And it's also got a good deal of directness, so if you are going a bit quicker or just generally you want to just know what the car is doing, this one gives you a better idea than what the Taisor does. Now yes, it feels a bit
heavier, for want of a better word, because it is, and it's got that element of body roll, considering it has that sort of SUV-ish body style to it, which means that the Taisor feels more nimble, more darty, say, in general use, but the Kiger is not that far behind, because what you get is some really progressive handling in both cars. And with the Kiger, the added advantage being that it's also quite stable, more stable than the Taisor at higher speeds. Now there is a price to pay for that with the Kiger in terms of its ride. So at lower speeds, the Taisor is definitely the more plush car here. Both of them have pretty high profile R16 tires, so that's not a differentiator. But yes, you do notice that the Kiger has that slightly Europeanish feel to it. It has that slight edge of firmness over, say, broken patches or broken roads. And say over a rough patch, you do feel it more in the Kiger than in the Taisor.
Priced at rupees 13.28 lakh on road for this top CVT trim, the value that the Renault Kiger offers is hard to look past. This is when you consider the bold looks, the well-appointed cabin and the good features list. The Toyota Taisor is more expensive at rupees 15.59 lakh, which hampers it, but it manages to gain an edge with the refinement, space and comfort it offers in everyday driving.